For more on this, Andrij Dobriansky, the chair of UN Affairs at the Ukrainian World Congress, joins us from New York. Andrij, welcome.
Thank you.
Ukraine needs help on many, many fronts at this point.
Yes, and Ukrainians need help. Thankfully, the international community has been working on not just sending humanitarian supplies, but more and more the Western countries are trying to figure out how to send additional arms to the Ukrainian military. That's the most important thing. Ukraine could really use some more drones, unmanned. This is not a violation of any NATO laws. If Russia was able to conduct cyber attacks on NATO countries with no after effects, I don't know how an unmanned drone would count as an attack by a NATO country. So there's plenty of things that could be done in addition, and especially tonight as we see attacks on nuclear reactors, as we see possibly even more evidence of war crimes happening in Ukraine. The rest of the world needs to figure out how much it's comfortable seeing before it acts even further.
Whenever the opportunity does come up for these peace talks, like we saw yesterday, I guess it gives people a shred of optimism that maybe Vladimir Putin wants to bow out of this at this point, but they always end the same way. Do you have any optimism for that line of discussions?
In terms of how things always tend to end up, that's the first reaction for many Ukrainians. Many of these kinds of discussions had been happening since 2014 and 2015. Things break down very quickly. Russia decides to have another advance. And I would also like to point out that, there was a member of the OSCE International Monitoring Team that was killed today because of Russia's violence. So it's not just that they're committing violence against Ukrainians and the people on the territory of Ukraine, but even international monitors need to be worried about setting foot in Ukraine.
And on the refugee front, as we're watching all of these people flow out of Ukraine, has the U.S. been receptive to taking some of them? I know that's a much farther journey, but
It is.
what does that situation look like?
Well, first and foremost, what needed to happen is the United States needed to act in response to the Ukrainian citizens that are on American territory. And that happened just a few hours ago. The Secretary of Homeland Security announced that for the next 18 months, Ukrainians would be granted temporary protected status if they had already arrived prior to the 1st of March. This is a very big issue because for people entering the United States or being here already, we do not want any country to feel forced that they need to send Ukrainian nationals back to Ukraine to reapply for a visa. This happens for students, for family members, etc. So that's the first step. But then what you mentioned in terms of accepting refugees is something that President Biden himself will have to make a decision. In October of 2021, he set the limit for refugees for the fiscal year of 2022. And in that limit, that cap, that the United States set, it only allowed for 10,000 refugees to come from all of Europe. So this is something that advocates on the ground here in the United States will be talking about very loudly. We cannot allow our allies in Europe to bear the entire burden of refugees coming onto their territory. There is certainly more that the United States can do.
You look at the scale of destruction in some of these cities already, 1 week into this conflict. You just know that life has changed indelibly for all Ukrainians for the foreseeable future.
Absolutely. And even if, however, President Putin were to decide at the drop of a hat to pull back all of his troops to make sure that nothing further goes on, this is not something that guarantees Ukraine's safety going forward. So, frankly, what the world is seeing Putin doing now is something that needs to be stopped. And Ukraine is the one that's stopping it with the world's help monetarily, financially, as well as with the supplying of arms. Because even if Putin were to pull out, that he is still in charge of Russia, according to his changed constitution, until 2036. No country should feel safe, certainly no country on the border of Russia, if he declared during that evening of the UN Security Council that the borders of his country were not drawn by him and he does not respect them. So any country on Russia's border should not feel safe so long as that man is in charge of Russia.
Yeah, Andrij, excellent as always to talk to you. Absolutely heartbreaking pictures that we're seeing coming out of Ukraine. We feel for you and your fellow citizens. Thank you.